Honestly, success is defined by what men do all the time. And I'm just going to be totally on. No, I'm serious, because I've been studying women in Danish design, and I'm realizing that all these design books are only writing about men because their definition of what success in design is limited to what men were doing, and women were doing something totally different historically. And there's like maybe a couple of pages about how women were master weavers and master ceramicists and master painters at ceramicists, and like 100 years of history is like this in those books, because it's just they're not focusing on it on the same level that they're focusing on what all the men are doing. So we need to change what success is, and what successful people look like too.
Yes. Hello everyone, and welcome to the On the Ball podcast, where we have curious conversation about life, career, spirituality, and anything in between. My name is Eniko Toth, a civil engineer turned world traveler, public speaker, trainer, and Toastmasters champion. My goal is to bring you inspirational topics and people that can help you find your own definition of success. When you are ready, it is time to be on the ball. This podcast will be truly inspiring for you and probably for many people you know. So please share the link of the podcast with them. Also, a quick reminder, hit the subscribe and love buttons to get notified about the upcoming episodes. Then share a rating and a review if you like what you are listening to. Today's guest is no one else than Kathryn Larsen, aka the Seaweed Girl, who is an architectural technologist and biobased designer working with seaweed and eelgrass. Kathryn took inspiration from the ancient Danish building design and implemented it in our world of regulation in the building industry. She believes that innovation can be about taking a closer look to something old and creating something new from that, using technology to do so. She took an inspirational idea and made it happen. She has already built multiple prototypes of eelgrass roofs and insulation. She's a sustainability leader and changemaker in the building industry. She wants to open her own company where Kathryn wants to create sustainable design solutions associated with history and tradition while reducing the level of pollution in our world. She translated all the materials from Danish and tries to gain awareness of this new way of construction across the planet. She has been featured by MOOT in Denmark, and she was a speaker at Antenna 2019. She has traveled to the Netherlands, South Africa, London to present her project. In the meanwhile, she volunteered at her old university where she held classes on using seaweed in construction. This episode is about sustainability and taking care of our planet. It is about the change we need in our industry and the innovative ideas that get us there. I believe that we should learn something old every day and reflect on our past to build a better and more successful future. And I'm happy that there are more like-minded people out there in the world. We need sustainable innovators in our world, and I'm happy to welcome Kathryn Larsen today to talk further about this topic. But before we begin, if you would like to check out Kathryn's work, go to www.kathrynlarsen.com. You can find the link in the podcast description. And now we are ready to get started with today's lesson.
I love it, and also I just have to say I love the way you say my name. Like, it's so wholesome. It's so weird. Maybe this is just me, but it's just so weird hearing like people say this about you. Like, ooh, is this me?
But yeah, it is you, and you have achieved so many incredible things, and you are a change maker. So it is time to believe it. And I'm really happy that you took this invitation and you are sharing your knowledge with us about this topic. So for the beginning, can you tell us a bit more about your project and where did you actually find it? Like, how did the idea come from?
So the idea came from a little competition that we were doing in school. It was called a charrette. It's when you have like 2 days to figure out like a concept and you have to present it. Mm-hmm. And I stumbled across this project called The Modern Seaweed House by Van Kunsten. And it was this seaweed summer house that was inspired by these traditional seaweed roofs from the island of Lesu. And they had built it like a couple of meters away from one of these original houses. And in that, they had used eelgrass in the walls as insulation. And they had also created this like cladding material where they had taken the seaweed, the eelgrass, and they had shoved it into these like nets and used that as like cladding on the exterior. So I saw that and I started learning about eelgrass from that project. And I realized very quickly it was like this really incredible building material. So I was like, wow, this is a fantastic resource. And it wasn't just used in Denmark, it was used around the world. And it was used in many different construction styles. And I quickly realized that this was something that was almost completely forgotten. And I was looking also at the traditional houses and I was wondering, okay, we have this example of like what a modern seaweed house might look like, but if it was me doing it and I wanted to do a modern interpretation of what this thatching method would look like, what would that look like? And I just couldn't get that idea out of my head. So it became this really weird obsession of mine. And I'm just that type of person. Like when I hone in on a specific topic, I just start Googling and Googling and Googling. But like I really hit a brick wall because my Danish wasn't good enough at that point. So it became this process of like, oh, I'll learn a bit more Danish. And then I would read more about these houses. And I just could not wrap my brain around how do you actually build with seaweed? How do you thatch with seaweed? Like how does this material work?
Yeah, that was the first question I had as well when I saw what you are doing.
Yeah, like like how it's seaweed. You know, you think you see it on the beach, you're like, how the heck could you ever build with this? And it turns out that like on the island itself, it was actually women that had transformed this technique of building with this material. And they
That's so cool.
Yeah, like they used their craftswoman knowledge. They were like, we know how to spin. This is seaweed. Why don't we just like act like we're spinning the seaweed and apply it to our roofs?
Yeah, I really like that mindset because nowadays the building industry is male dominated. So to hear that in the ancient times it was women who did the hard work, it's just something that it's a different idea that we are not used to.
Yeah, exactly. And almost funny because it forces us to change our perception of like what we know, because we think, oh yeah, thatching, it's men who do the thatching, you know. No, on the island is the women who did it and they were the bosses of this. Like you had like a whole village of women come together and thatching a roof in like a matter of days, which is insane because it takes now like 3 months for 2 or 3 grown men to do the same process. So it's like these women were a force to be reckoned with. Which is really cool.
Yeah, that definitely is. We are starting to get that fire back in ourselves and then start to have this female power back in our world. And what is the benefit of eelgrass and seaweed? Why shall we use that in our building construction?
So eelgrass, I always refer to it as seaweed because that's what historically all the resources are just like seaweed, seaweed, seaweed. It's actually a type of seagrass, which is a completely different thing. It's a plant with roots in it that grows in the water. And a lot of seagrasses have these properties where they're really, really good for insulation. So it's not just eelgrass or like other seagrasses like Neptune balls, for instance. They've all been shown to have this similar property where they're really good at making walls warm, trapping the heat in buildings and in roofs, and also really good at dampening sound.
Is it?
Yeah, so it's got good acoustic properties. It's got good insulating properties. And this is something that people figured out in the US around late 19th century, I want to say, because they had actually an insulation product called Cabot's quilt made of eelgrass. And like 300, 400 years later, people were opening up the walls in their New England homes and they're realizing, oh my God, I have like, what is this in here? And it's just old, dried, preserved eelgrass. It lasts for like 400 years in your wall cavities. And these seaweed roofs, they also last for 300 years in between changings.
So how come we never heard about it?
Well, the building regulations mainly are focused on construction, I would say, from like the last 50 years onwards. So construction really became standardized at that point. We had so many different building materials enter the realm of building, like around the 1950s, some of them were not very good. Like if you think about asbestos, like, you know, not that was okay to build with in the 1950s, and now it's like, oh, don't build with that. But basically what happened during the same crucial time period is that there was a massive wasting disease around the world. There was some sort of fungal infection that affected every single eelgrass bed around the world. And so it stopped washing up in predictable locations, and the beds never really fully recovered. So, while growing seaweed, for example, regular seaweed, not eelgrass, is really easy because it's got like a hold fast on it. It's kind of like a barnacle. You can literally have it growing on ropes in the water. Eelgrass needs to be in the soil. And basically to replant the beds, you kind of like need to dive down, manually plant every seed, and then just like basically pray that the tide does not wash it away. So a lot of governments now are looking into conservation efforts to try and bring back the seabeds, because it's a money sink. But yeah, because of this, it fundamentally changed how people built with this material. I mean, even in the Netherlands, I'm finding out people built massive dikes out of eelgrass. So because it would clump together and solidify so it wouldn't erode. So it's like, wow, this is fascinating. This material was so widespread and used so often and was used historically. And now mostly people are like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, exactly. So do you see other companies using this product, or is it mostly you who tries to bring it back?
Yeah, there's Studio Seagrass in Denmark, and they're trying to make really practical, easy to use products out of it. And they're creating a acoustic bat actually called Seaweed, and that should be market ready, I think, in 2021 actually. And I actually wrote about them in my thesis, and I wrote about another company called Zostera that partnered with Studio Seagrass for this new product. But Zostera also had an insulation bat. And they found that like basically the insulation industry in Denmark is so conservative, they basically could not, you know, get anywhere with this insulation bat. And they were like, okay, we switch now to an acoustic panel, try and get further with that. And then maybe we go back to our bat after that becomes a success. Because I mean, that's another thing about the Danish building industry. It's so insanely conservative, even if you're using a material that's like 100 years old.
It definitely is. So I really loved when I watched one of your interviews and you said this innovation can be about taking a closer look to the past and implementing it to the present and using technology. Where did that, like, I know that your idea is to bring back the ancient Danish design. So why was this such an important message for you?
So I think I'm really influenced by my time living in Japan. I used to sit and watch construction sites a lot when I was living there. And one of the things that I really loved about construction in Japan was I was obsessed with this really old temple construction and how they would build with timber, and they would make all these really specified joints that would then lock together and make these structures earthquake resistant. So they had all this old technology. And then what they do nowadays is they will draw up these buildings, and somebody will come in and calculate all these precise joints. They will send it off to a CNC mill, and the CNC mill will mill all these joints so that when it comes on site, they just hammer it into place. And it's like the same solution. It's just been updated for technology and can be calculated according to technology. And I thought that was just not just smart, but also has some sort of connection to our culture and our history, which I also think is very, very important. And so I kind of was absorbing all of this when I was living in Japan, and it strongly influenced me that when I came to Denmark, I also saw that there was this craftsman culture and this big, big pool of knowledge for building that you don't really see in the States. So I was very excited by that. And I had somehow thought that it would be the same situation as it would be in Japan, and that there would be a lot of architects with this sort of sensitivity to the past and implementing it. Um, and I realized that it's very few architects. And in fact, when my project came out, I was very shocked because a couple of people accused me of overly romanticizing the past. And I was like, that's not what
Wow.
I'm trying to do at all. I just think that this is fascinating. This is a part of your culture, but this is also smart for the location that you're
Mm-hmm.
in. These are materials that are local. And it's just, oh my God, this is the only place in the world that farms eelgrass for construction. Oh my God, that is so cool. Um, but people were like, no, like, what are you doing? Like, stop.
And what do you
So,
do when people tell you to stop? Because it's something that they're not really
you
expecting
know,
in this kind of world. They
yeah,
need something new, so they don't want to look to the past. And innovation is about failure all the time. So how do you overcome that?
I'm pretty comfortable with failure. I think, I have all these testing installations in public that are basically failing in public. And I think it's important to show that because it's basically like showing people that, innovation is about making a ton of different mistakes and
Mm-hmm.
not being afraid to test it and keep learning and keep growing. So when I built my second installation, for example, I basically built it worst case scenario to fail so that it would be exposed to the wind from all different directions because I wanted to see how would it fail and if there was some sort of pattern to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that being able to analyze that and be open about it is really important. I know that Elon Musk has a similar principle, but he is, of course, millions of dollars. I don't, but he has a similar principle where he's not afraid to fail in public because you learn from failure, and you can then, rapidly prototype even more because
Mm-hmm.
you're learning and analyzing it. And so, really, a failure is not a failure if you can learn from it. So that's my
Yes,
principle.
that's definitely true. And you also mentioned that with this eelgrass, we can reduce the amount of pollution that we put out in the world. So, do you see any other benefits, or how else can we reduce the amount of pollution, especially in the building industry, which is one of the most polluting industries in the world?
Oh, there's so many ways we could do it. I mean, not just using materials like eelgrass or like natural materials. I mean, even if it's just as simple as saying we build locally and don't ship concrete elements from one country to the other to build with, like that reduces the footprint. I think that there's a huge potential to like look at sustainability from multiple angles and try and combine it into a way that we can just reduce overall our footprints. And it comes from analyzing not just what materials we're building with, but where those materials are coming from. I think there's a real big potential to look at sustainability from many different angles because it's not just the materials you're using. For example, eelgrass is a really smart solution as insulation in Denmark because you can farm it locally. But if
Mm-hmm.
you were to start shipping that around the world to use as a product, suddenly it becomes a lot less smart.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's about realizing what we have in an area, what we can use, and maybe what we can even reuse, and
Mm-hmm.
designing so that we could maybe reuse things in the future. There's like a million different ways to tackle it. And I think that we should be putting a ton of money into all of this and exploring it and calculating the carbon footprint of buildings and just making that open source knowledge instead of
Mm-hmm.
hiding it like, oh no, our building is too polluting, we can't show that. Like, just put it out there.
Mm-hmm.
Just be transparent so we can start building better. But that's a very it's a crazy thing to say, I feel like,
It
for some
is,
people,
but
but
transparency is one of the most important things in a company, isn't it? So we do need to pay attention to it. And the more we share and the more transparent we are, the people will start to align with that or start seeking solutions.
yeah, exactly. I completely agree with that. And I think it is going to take transparency to get there because we need a radical change right now for the building industry. It's 40%. Uh, provides 40% of the carbon dioxide footprint in the world.
It.
Like that's, and we talk about fashion all the time. We're like, fashion pollutes so bad, and we show all these mountains of clothes, and that's 10%. That's
Mhm.
responsible for 10% of the carbon footprint. The building industry and all the human activity associated with it is 40%. So we have to do something. it's just not reasonable to ignore it anymore.
So if you could invest in anything, would it be something for you to invest in and start more innovative ideas or start looking more in the past? Or what would you do in this case to reduce this 40%?
What I want to do, and I actually don't want to create products per se, but I want to research this, or at least push people towards researching all these different things and researching also the performance of traditional building materials. Because like you said, they're not in the building codes because they've been forgotten about and because people are too afraid to build with them now. But we need to start looking at it again, and we need to start analyzing it with all the technology that we currently have and saying, okay, how well does a mud wall insulate? And, do we have to build with mud a certain way, or can we be more creative with it? Is there a potential to create new and exciting architecture out of something we perceive as boring or too historical? And so I'm all about, removing our misconceptions and our stereotypes of what traditional building is and integrating it into new and exciting architecture.
So how can we push these regulations? Because I was partly a part of this. So my boss, when I was having my internship, he was part of building the Eurocodes, the European regulations. And it's so hard to get on a common ground and figure out what to get in and what to leave out. So how can we push the regulations either in the building industry, but in any other industry that says these are the limits and we shouldn't go further, when to trust something new?
I think what it comes from is we have to look at the carbon footprint of buildings and we have to regulate that. And the more that governments decide to start regulating that, the more people are going to be looking at natural materials. There's the so-called bio-based materials. And when people talk about bio-based design in the Netherlands, there's like all these crazy biocomposites and people are like, oh, circular economy, you don't use your eggshells, let's make it into a wall material. And other people are like, ew, that's kind of gross, it's kind of nasty. That's not what I'm talking about. I mean, we have basically, like, that's pretty cool, but like we also have all this historical use of bio-based materials in historical constructions. And that's also bio-based. So we can both create, crazy eggshell cladding, and we can also look at, using straw in walls and making hay bale construction again and figuring out, okay, how do we build with that? And in Copenhagen, or Henning Larsen just did a project with hay insulation for school. So, there's a lot of intersections because people start realizing, hey, these natural materials are lower in carbon dioxide. They actually absorb it. Why don't we use them? And then I'm saying the roadmap is already there in the past. Let's take inspiration and keep going.
So what would you suggest to nowadays innovators?
I would just suggest to find your tribe of people, find people that believe in you, that, are going to keep pushing you even when you're like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, I'm dumb, I'm, nervous. Everyone has these crazy feelings where they just feel completely incompetent. And so you just need to have a group of people that will lift you up and help you keep going through it. Yeah.
Where did you find yours? Was it in Denmark or?
It was in Denmark. It was a combination. My husband is definitely my biggest support, which is why he's left the apartment so we can record this. But I also had a lot of really good friends that I went to school with. They helped build all of my projects. I would not be anywhere without that support. And then also too, all the people I met in Denmark, like my photographer lady. She also too was lifting me up constantly and saying this is really good. You have to keep going. You cannot stop. And it's all that just really helps when you really feel oh, I'm going nowhere.
Did you have anyone that you had to leave behind or cut from your life because they were not there for you to support? And how did you feel about that?
No, actually, I would say nobody, but I also have a very tight inner circle of friends where the people that I surround myself with, they're just really supportive and loving and caring. So it was actually nobody in my life that was mean, should I say. Everyone was very, very encouraging and very, very supportive. It's really only strangers that don't know me that, you know, are somewhat critical. And I totally get that too. Like, it's okay to be critical. Um, but I was very lucky. I have a great support network of people that I've met.
And as you mentioned before, the building industry is male dominated. So have you ever felt excluded, or how do you feel in this industrial environment where you are a female who wants to bring a change?
Oh, it's a boys club. It's 100% a boys club. I've been to conferences or stages or whatever where I'm literally the only woman in like a crowd full of dudes. And you do notice it. If you're a woman, you do notice it. I can't say that in some of those circumstances, I really have not been treated with anything but respect, but you do notice that there is a lack of representation, especially the higher you go. And so I guess you could say my coping strategy about that has been very vocal about that and say, hey, I'm not afraid to say I'm a woman doing this. And hey, ladies, you can do this too if you want to. But also just calling out, you know, the bullshit that you could face because of it. So, yeah.
So what would you tell to those women who are interested in this idea of getting into the male industry in any part of their lives? Like, it could be finance, it could be building industry, because there are many more male dominated areas. So what do you think they should hear?
I think they should hear that what they're doing is important, and there are going to be days where you wonder why you're doing it, and might be moments too where you feel like you're being, you know, marginalized, but what you're doing is so important for other women, because by being there, by showing up, by representing, you're showing other women that they can too do it. And then we're just gonna all climb that ladder together, in my opinion.
A bit more about sustainable living. There are so many solutions and so many ideas out there. So how do you implement it in your personal daily life? Is there any techniques that you started implementing since you are in this topic, or how do you try to live more sustainably?
Well, right now I have one lamp. So, and I have an app that shows how much energy we use. We use less than the
What's
average.
that app?
It's connected actually to our building. Our building is like a smart building that like measures how much energy we use. And I get monthly updates. So because we have one lamp and because I've been too lazy to install more lamps, we have less energy input we use less energy than the average person. Like two people, we use as much energy as like less than one person that they've calculated.
Wow. Okay.
That's not intentional. That's just me being extremely lazy. I would say, you know, I make an effort to consume less when it comes to buying luxuries. I didn't think, for example, I used the fashion as an example earlier because I never really thought about clothing when I was younger or where it was going or when I was done with it, you know. I didn't understand that. And when I saw documentaries on it, I was like, oh, this is really important. I should try to make sure that like the clothing that I wear, I'm using, I'm not buying things that I'm not going to wear. And I buy secondhand too. So trying to be conscious of that. But otherwise, I just think people are flung with so many things at them constantly to try and like reduce their footprint. And I really think that if anything, we should be looking at corporations to reduce their impact, because like at the end of the day, we can all try to like go vegan. That's going to be pretty hard for like 7 billion people to do. Or Coca-Cola could just like change the way they package all the billions and billions and billions of their products around the world, and that could make a much bigger impact. So I'm a bit torn because I think at the end of the day, we're creatures of comfort. You know, we can't all be perfect eco warriors, and you know, I think that's okay. I think we have to start questioning who are the people in charge that are making design decisions that create these issues in the first place, and why are they not taking responsibility?
Definitely. I remember when I was sitting on our graduation, and we invited someone from a company, I'm not going to say which company, and they made a speech, and he started to say that from next year on, we are planning to package our goods in recyclable plastic packages. And I'm like, aren't you doing that already? We
Yeah,
are
why
in
aren't you doing
Denmark.
that? Yes,
And you are
exactly.
just still only planning it for next year. And that's still a maybe. And it's only going to be recyclable. It's not going to be something else
I
than
know.
plastic. So there are
I
so many
know.
companies
And
doing
then
that.
at that point too, you have to question like, is it really making a big enough impact, or is it just marketing and just lip service? So I also I might be a hard critic, but I also think that we have to start being harder on companies because like if we have people that are just insanely creative that are doing things by themselves with zero help, zero funding. Imagine how much more we could do if we just had more like open mindedness at the top of the chain and more creativity with all that money doing something. Just,
So yeah,
call
how
me
do you think
crazy.
we should choose the companies that we would like to represent, that who we buy from? What shall we check in the shop?
You can try and figure out parent companies. So every single company is like has a parent company these days. And depending
What is a
on
parent company?
so at the top, there might be this massive conglomerate. Like, okay, I'm just going to use Nestle as an example. When I hear Nestle, like as a kid, I'm like, ooh, chocolate, like cute, love chocolate. But like they've got their fingers in everything from cosmetics to water to this to that, and you start seeing how like certain companies have this trickle down effect through all these other companies, and it's not something so much that we can change or force change upon. It's something to just be aware of, that if you don't like what one company does, their parent company could have all these other companies that are also having similar business practices or not. It's just important to be aware of like that chain of ownership, because it is like a massive pyramid sometimes. So yeah, just a small thing.
Just do a bit of research on what we buy. And
do research on what you buy, and if you really do care, like try and figure out like, okay, how was this actually made? Like if you get a phone, realize like, hey, some of the metals in this might be mined by children somewhere. Think about that, like actually just like think about it, like wow, like what am I using, where did it come from? And that's another thing too to think about with the building industry, because certain architects are like, solar panels will be our savior. And again, we know that the mining conditions for the metals in solar panels come from resource streams that are from third world countries that have the potential to be really destructive to the environment, because there is less environmental protections. There's also less worker protections. So by saying, oh, we should just all just order solar panels and it's going to save everything, it's a chain. Everything is a chain. Everything is a system. And you really can't fix problems without looking at the whole first and then trying along the way to fix things.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when we were designing some buildings in Denmark for our projects, and we had to use solar panels. After some time, I realized that no matter how many more I put on the roof, it's not going to change the building environment, but I still need to reduce it with a big amount just to be in the building regulations, just to be legible for even building this building.
Yeah, huge advantage to like the calculations. They're like skewed in favor of using solar panels, because it's like there's a huge energy frame deduction for using them in Denmark. So it's like if your building could be literally the worst built, least efficient building ever, but slap some solar panels on it, slap enough on, maybe cover the facade in them, and suddenly you're energy compliant. And we know logically that just doesn't make sense. Like this building is not necessarily greener or better, but like, it's also has a lot to do with politics and architecture. And again, how much role do we play in that? And I always think that at the end of the day, what we build, what we don't build, it is inherently a political decision. So might as well just own it.
Yeah, that's very true. Unfortunately, it is very true. They are the ones who make the regulations. So some point we do need to follow. And I really enjoyed when you said like that, getting back to the point of these solar panels and what is at the background. This is the same with automatic cars, like solar cars or electric cars.
Yeah.
Using the energy is actually worse than the carbon footprint that we leave.
Yeah, it's something to be aware of that, like, at the end of the day, we are just looking for these band-aid solutions, and because we don't want to hear that we actually have to change our habits. We want to drag our fingers kicking and screaming, but like the environment doesn't care. COVID doesn't care. COVID was created because they didn't, care about the environment, and some person invaded a bat's territory. Like there's all these consequences to just not caring, because nature is cruel. Nature's going to be here after we're all gone. So, it's about time we start figuring out what to do. Instead of ignoring it.
And I really enjoy, and I truly look up to you because you started to look to the future instead of seeking something new. Because I do believe that these solutions have been there for centuries. We just forgot it, all of them, during the industrialization, during the World War, where we started to come up with new solutions. So we said, oh, these are actually better, they are easier, they are cheaper. So why to do the more time consuming ones?
Yeah, exactly. And this is new shiny thing, and everyone is like, let's ignore the past. The past is, some of it was just nuked in World War II. Literally whole cities were burned down to the ground. So it was like, let's just start fresh. Let's do something totally different. Let's build differently. Let's move on from the past, because the past is so painful. And I do think that was a factor in some of the decision making for building in the 50s and 60s in Europe, especially.
And it does have an effect on our mindset too, and how we look at our own personal past, I think.
Yeah, so, for sure.
I have some closing questions to you. What is your definition of success?
Oh, that's a good question. I can't answer that because I think that if you're always chasing success, then you're never happy. And I think the true definition of success is just being happy in the moment with yourself and what you're doing. And if you are, then you are successful. Honestly, success is defined by what men do all the time. And I'm just going to be totally I'm serious, because I've been studying women in Danish design, and I'm realizing that all these design books are only writing about men because their definition of what success in design is limited to what men were doing, and women were doing something totally different historically. And there's like maybe a couple of pages about how women were master weavers and master ceramicists and master painters at ceramicists, and like 100 years of history is like this in those books, because it's just, they're not focusing on it on the same level that they're focusing on what all the men are doing. So we need to change what success is, and what successful people look like too. But I mean, like, that's the thing too, like you could be unsuccessful in one area and successful in others. So it's important not to put so much pressure on yourself and put an ideal on yourself of what you think you have to achieve. It's important to be aware of what you do have, and be grateful for it.
Yeah, I like your answer. The second question to you would be, imagine that this podcast is listened by everyone in the world, and then you have 1 minute to deliver one message, the most important message of yours. So what would you say?
I'd say be kind. Be kind to yourself, be kind to other people. We live in a world where we're constantly being put against each other, and we're not being very kind to the planet. We're not being very kind to each other. Just take a second to remember that if you're talking to another person, that person might be going through something, or if you're online talking to somebody, remember too that person, there's a person behind that keyboard. Just take a second to remember that.
Is there anything else you would like to share about your project, or anything else that we might have missed?
No, I would just like to say that like everything is very challenging with COVID right now. So I haven't been able to continue like I planned, but I'm still trying every day to
What is your next step? So after you graduate from the Netherlands now, what do you plan to do?
My plan and my dream is to open my own firm, or possibly study a PhD, and open my own firm. So I'm not quite sure yet. I do know that I want to have my own firm, though, my own creative business, and I want it to be a business that combines architecture discipline, but with lots of other things, with research and with collaboration and with people from different backgrounds. I think in particular in Denmark, there's a very closed-minded view of what the built environment is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we need to start having people from more disciplines talking and creating together.
Yes, I totally agree with you. Not even in the building industry, but also in all other industries. The broader we go and the more different personalities we include in it, and the more ideas we think about and give a chance to, there's a bigger possibility that something better is going to be at the end, the result.
I totally agree. Some people have an idea that success is about making money or, fame. And I think that if you live in pursuit of that, then you will always end up very unhappy.
Yes, it is. So thank you very much for your time today and for our chat. And I think you have an amazing future ahead of you, truly, that you are bringing the change into our lives that we should have. And you are making it happen either by your research and inspiring others to do their own research. And hopefully this message will get to so many others and they'll get inspired, get innovative on how to learn something old every day, or even with just your own firm and creating these materials in our lives. So thank you for being here and thank you for doing this work for all of us.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to Kathryn Larsen today. It was a very interesting talk. Thank you as well for listening in today. If you would like to learn more about Kathryn's project, you can check her out on her website www.kathrynlarsen.com. I also include the link in the podcast description so you can click on that. If you found this episode motivating, make sure that you share it with others and text this to your friend right now who you think would be inspired by this story. The best way to live a happy and fulfilled life is to serve others. So share this episode with people you care about. It has no cost, but will elevate them and make their lives even better. If this is your first time here, click that love and subscribe buttons and make sure that you leave a rating and review. I would love to hear your thoughts and feedback on how this message lifted you up, brought you a change into your life. I would also love to hear your own definition of success. I'm so grateful for your support, sending love and great health to you all. And now it is time for you to be on the ball.